Last October, in the quiet Mississippi town of Pascagoula, two local men confronted authorities with a rather bizarre story. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker told of a strange craft landing near their fishing site and of being taken aboard by three unearthly creatures. The two men were questioned under hypnosis and lie detectors, but their story remained intact. One of the men suffered a nervous breakdown and is still under treatment. Among the skeptics were Ralph and Judy Blum, already at work on a UFO book. With W5 last week, Ralph and Judy returned to Pascagoula.
Judy and I stumbled into this book. It came to us to be written. Suddenly we were in a wave of waves. UFOs were being seen across the country again. We were in what they call a flap. And people began experiencing things that they couldn't explain. Something was happening in our skies in the midst of Watergate, Agnew, the energy crisis, the Middle East. Something was happening and people couldn't understand what it was. We spoke about UFOs, but nobody really knew. And then it hit right here where we are. It hit Pascagoula. Charlie Hickson entered the news and we had a book to write.
Something happened October of '73 that would go down in history. The spaceship came with many blue lights set down near them in the night. Three little men came out and took them inside. They looked him over with one big eye. They say what they saw was the real thing, though. They were the ones that saw the Pascagoula UFO.
We were sitting on the other side of the pier with our feet, over toward the river, fishing in the river. And the fish still wasn't biting, so I told Calvin, I said, well, we might as well go home. But I guess that was when I heard it. It was some kind of zipping sound. And when I turned around, in this area out here, about 40 or 50 feet out there, it was some kind of craft, it looked like it's going to come right onto the ground. But it came on down and hovered about a foot and a half or 2 feet off of the ground. We didn't know what to do, the river behind us and that out there not knowing what it was. So, and then before we had time to really do anything, it seemed like an opening appeared. And toward the end, it was, toward us. And the blue light, it had blue flashing lights as it was, approaching the ground, but then they went out. And when the opening appeared, some source of light came from the inside. It was just almost blinding.
Sheriff Diamond, can you tell me just what happened that night?
No, sir, I can't. All I can tell you is there was two men came into the sheriff's department approximately 8:30 and 9 o'clock. They were all excited, upset, wanting to climb the walls, hysterical, crying. That's actually all I know is what happened. I mean, as far as me seeing what happened, I don't know.
Of course, we could see them in the opening coming from, when it started out to craft. But
Did you think it was people coming out at first?
Well, they had. I kind of thought it was people at first, off like that. But of course, when they appeared there in front of me, it was the most shock I've ever had in my life.
What did you see?
Well, they were shorter than me. I'd say about 5'2" or 3", and they didn't have a neck. Their head, it seemed to come directly to their shoulders, and they had something. It came out to a point about where a nose would be, and on each side the ears. And I believe that they looked like they were a little longer on the ears than the nose.
But still pointed the ears.
They were still pointing, yes.
But since I was down there, and since I was a physician, and several other scientists and investigators were asked to consult and look into the situation, I was asked would I mind if I would be present, and I said I wouldn't mind at all. And while it is still very difficult for us to believe that a spaceship landed and that robot-type creatures came out and actually took these two people into the spaceship, these men, in my opinion, believe that they saw this and that they were being honest in reporting what they have reported.
But it seemed to me when they came out that doorway, or that opening or whatever it was, then just almost instantly they were right there on us. And their arms, they had arms, and I saw the arms moving here and in the shoulders. but they had webbed. I mean, their fingers were webbed, and then they had something like a thumb, and they were like this.
We questioned them at length, and then we left the room and recorded every all the conversation they had. Recorded between the two of them. And one of them kept wanting to pray. And he said, after all I went through on this earth, he said, why should I have to see something like this?
Calvin Parker, I was questioning him, and at one time he wanted to climb the wall. That's how nervous and how shook up he was.
They had me one on this arm like this, and on the other one, you know, they had my other arm like that. And I just seemed to lift up to the same height they were off the ground, and we just moved into the craft.
Now inside, how did they lay you out? Do you remember how it happened?
Yes. I didn't see any tables or chairs or anything in there. I'm not saying it wasn't in there because the light was almost blinding, but I didn't see any. And when they carried me inside, they seemed to just lean me back, you know. And this eye, well, I keep referring to it as an eye, and it moved up to in front of me about this close. And it started right at my eyes, looking me right in the eye. And it hesitated there for a few seconds, and it just started moving over my entire body. When they brought me from the craft along this area here, and they didn't drop me, you know, they just released me back to the ground. And I fell. I don't know why my legs were weak. I don't know why it was the fright or what it was, but I fell onto the ground. And that's when I seen Calvin. He's standing right over here in this area, and he was standing facing the river with his arms outstretched like that, just like he was staring at something.
Tell me about the lie detector test.
Well, so that was run by Pilkington. Was it Pilkington?
Pennington.
Pennington.
That they run this type of test about 6 times a day. And when they were asked to come over here to talk to these people, they had in their mind that it was just a big joke. And if I understand it correctly, they ran one test on Mr. Hickson. The machine showed that he was telling the truth. Then they run another one. And then the examiner, he began to wonder himself. So he ran the third test, and he believed just what Mr. Hickson had told him.
Mr. Booth, tell me what happened that night in October.
Well, I got up and had turned off the TV and come to the front door, which you can see right behind me. Just as usual, checking to see if it was locked. So I looked out the window at the top, and naturally I saw this object above the street light out there. So naturally it caught my eye with the lights was on it. Couldn't hear any racket or anything. So I opened the door after a few seconds to step out to see if I could really tell what it was. It just took off.
Can you describe it?
Well, it was round, had lights all the way around it, turning in a counter-clockwise motion. It had a dome on top with a bright light shining out through the top of it. To tell the actual figure of it or anything, you couldn't tell. You could just see the lights and the one on top.
When it happened to Charlie, the creatures, whatever they were, didn't communicate with him. Now, it's enough to say you saw a UFO to give you trouble these days in some towns. To be taken aboard is just a suspect idea. But somehow, if the creatures don't give you a message, you're just a touch less incredible. And Charlie says what he said and what we wrote about in the book. It was like they had a job to do, and they came and they did it.
I think there has to be a reason why that Calvin and me was picked.
Maybe because you could take it?
Well, it might be. I don't know. I think that they know more of what's going on down here on this earth than we think. And I don't know, they might have been, you might say, looking for somebody that could, you might say, hold up under the strain and convince people that there is another world and there's some kind of life on that world up there.
They were the ones that saw the Pascagoula UFO.
That's our program for this week. W5 will not be seen next week. We're going to repeat CTV's prize-winning inquiry on wiretapping in Canada, Hear No Evil. We'll be back on the 16th of June with a special wrapping up the federal election campaign to that date. On behalf of Carol Taylor and the entire W5 staff, I'm Bruce Phillips. Good night.
Are we alone? Is Earth really the only planet with life, or is something else out there? Here's investigative reporter Shelby Myers with a story that just might make you rethink everything.
It's been a debate for decades. Are aliens out there, and have they ever made contact with us? After 45 years of keeping it a secret from his own family, a Gulf Coast man's declining health has given him a reason to write a book and leave his legacy. Calvin Parker is now ready to tell the story of the event that would change his life forever.
Do you ever get any feelings or flashbacks when you come out here?
No, it's changed. It's hard to feel anything when you come out here.
What do you think about the whole experience? Think it happened?
I think something happened down there. I'm not at all sure what happened.
Something happened to them, the way they were upset. You don't fake fear. You know, he was scared. He was scared out of his mind.
In 1973, Calvin Parker was 19, a hard worker who just wanted to build a home and raise a family. But those plans would be derailed during a fishing trip in Pascagoula.
A real bright beam appeared all over us, but it kind of blinded me for a second, and when I got my vision back, I seen three bulky looking creatures coming toward us.
Parker will tell you, because of this night, he spent the last 45 years in hiding, scared to face the curious and unrelenting public eye.
We'd get up and go to work in the morning, nobody would never know, and they won't make us out to be idiots.
But after suffering a stroke and having 2 open heart surgeries, in a rare interview, Parker is recounting to me the night that changed his life.
And we pulled up and I noticed there was posted signs there. And I said, Charlie, you know, maybe we don't need to go fishing here. He said, no, that's fine. And that's when I noticed some blue hazy lights reflecting coming across from my back, out across the water. So I stood up thinking that I was going to go to jail for trespassing.
Just north of where Ingalls Shipyard now sits, Parker and his fishing buddy, 42-year-old Charles Hickson, would do anything but fish that night.
I seen 3 bulky looking creatures coming toward us, and they was probably 4.5, 5 foot tall. They built like football players, but I noticed they kind of moved mechanical wise, and they was floating off the ground. By the time we stood up and turned around, they was there on us all at one time. So 2 of them got a hold of Charlie, 1 of them got a hold of myself, and instantly I felt like that I just got relaxed.
Parker claims he and Hickson were levitated into the spacecraft.
There was an examination room, what I call it. And the old big ugly creature that brought me in, he took me and laid me on an examination table, and he just backed up out of the way. I couldn't move or anything. All I could do was look, and there was something about the size of a deck of cards that came out of the ceiling, and it hovered about a foot in front of my eyes, and then it went to the right side of my head, and it clicked, went behind my head, and it clicked, went to the left side of my head and clicked, and then straight to the front, and then it shot back up in the ceiling. And that's when I noticed some kind of little ruffling noise, and this more feminine looking creature came out. She looked completely different than the what I call the robot, because he moved like a robot, just mechanical wise. She looked kind of feminine looking and had fingers, regular fingers and all, come over and pinched me on the side of the cheek. And then she took her finger and run down my throat and got behind that little thing that hangs down back there and tried to come up in my nasal cavity. And that was when it started hurting and I started choking and I got scared. And she just kind of telepathically told me, you know, don't be afraid, we're not going to hurt you.
And with those words, Parker says the aliens dropped he and Hickson back off on the bank. Frozen in fear, Parker didn't want to let anyone know what happened. Hickson, however, said they had to tell somebody, so they called the Jackson County Sheriff's Office.
And I said, could I help you? He said, yeah, I've had something happen, but said, you gonna laugh if I tell you what it is. I said, look, fella, go ahead and tell me, I'm busy. What happened? He said, I got picked up by a UFO. I laughed. He said, I told you he was gonna laugh.
Still, former Jackson County Captain Glenn Ryder told the men to come into the station. Jackson County deputies had two choices that night. They could choose to believe Parker and Hickson had really been taken from the banks of the Pascagoula River like they said, or they could figure out if they were lying. So deputies stuck a secret tape recorder inside an interrogation room back at the station, and it's what they heard on those tapes that made them believe the two were not lying.
And they were upset. I figured they'd say, well, look, we got these guys food, but it wasn't that. They were still. The boy especially was upset.
The men would take lie detector tests and pass. Ufologists and researchers flew in right away to interview and hypnotize the two, concluding they did experience something traumatic. The two were even sent to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi to make sure they weren't radioactive.
It's a circus, media circus.
Within days, the story went global. After the two were checked out, former WALA TV reporter Rennie Brabner caught up with them.
Up at the emergency room door, there's a line of sheriff's cars out there. We went in with our cameras going and at least for the first time saw the two guys.
Brabner says to this day, it's still something viewers never seem to forget.
There's a reasonable chance that they'll say, wait a minute, didn't you cover those guys getting on the UFO? What do you think? Most of the stories you do, they're gone tomorrow or the next day or whenever. And it's always intrigued me a little bit that had some legs, some interest, particularly years and years and years later.
Like Captain Ryder, Brabner too believes something happened that night, but he isn't sure what.
I do not think they made it up in the sense that they created it out of whole cloth. I have been told that particularly Hickson was known to take a drink. Was it at the bottom of a bottle of John Barleycorn? I don't know.
Charles Hickson wrote a book on his encounter and spoke numerous times about it. He passed away in 2011. Parker says he's a religious man and believes there's an explanation why he went through what he did. For now, he still ponders why it happened to him.
You can't really pin everything down. You don't really know. And that's the point I'm holding now. I don't know what happened. I know something happened.
Definitely something to think about. Parker says the city of Pascagoula now plans to place a marker on the banks of the river this summer. We mentioned that this interview is rare since Parker spent most of his life hiding from the spotlight. Well, he says after a year of promoting his new book and speaking, he'll retreat from the spotlight once again. He plans to buy a houseboat and live on it with his wife. Now, if you want to know more about his book, The Closest Encounter, just head to our website, fox10tv.com.
Now you owe me one, and if you don't pay me when you owe me, then I'm going to pay you what you owe me. You see what I'm saying?